Hey y'all, welcome to Sandy's Library. I'm Sandy, and today I'm going to tell you about my great-grandfather, William L. Williams's early life before he met my great-grandmother, Lizzie Fuller. Before we get started though, a couple of things. I know I'm throwing a lot of names at y'all all at once, so if you need a visual, links to family trees for both my grandparents are posted in the description. And secondly, I want to clarify something I said in my intro video. I stated that Audrey Mobley Fuller gave her genealogical research to our half-cousin who never returned it. What I meant to say was that she gave him access to her research and he was supposed to return it when he was done, which he didn't. This half-cousin is no longer with us and neither are his parents. That said, Audrey Fuller's research is now in the hands of this half-cousin's maternal family, which has nothing to do with the Williamses or the Fullers. They should return Audrey Fuller's research to her daughter. That's all I'm saying. Okay, so my great-grandfather, William L. Williams, was born March 4th, 1869 in Berea, Ashley County, Arkansas. These days, Berea is non-existent, but it was once located about 10 miles northeast of Hamburg, Arkansas. His parents were Lawrence Williams and Julia Ann Wheat, and there are, or will be, other videos devoted to them. So for now, let's get back to their son, my great-grandfather. For most of his life, he was called Willie, or W.L., which has led to some controversy over what his middle name actually was. My grandmother, his daughter, told me specifically that her father's middle name was Lawrence, after his own father. She trusted that implicitly because she named my uncle Lawrence after her father. She would never have done that unless she heard the name Lawrence come out of Willie's mouth. However, her younger sister Allie, when interviewed by her half-cousin in 1980, where she claimed that Willie told her that he was named after his father's favorite brother, William Lunsford Williams, and this is where the notion came from that Willie's middle name was Lunsford. I've never heard anyone else in the family say that, and I'm talking about Willie's children. Never heard that come out of any of their mouths, including Aunt Allie's. And there's one more very important thing that blows Aunt Allie's story out of the water. Willie's father, Lawrence Williams, did not have a brother named William Lunsford Williams. His brother's name was William Benjamin Williams. It's also worth noting there are no records to support that Willie's middle name was Lunsford. His tombstone and memorial say William Lawrence Williams, and other than that, there is no record to support Lawrence as his middle name either. Only his children's word. See, in 1965, Willie's grandchildren got together and put up a memorial statue in a cemetery for him that reads William Lawrence Williams. They didn't just pull that name out of the air. Willie's children told them what his middle name was. And granted, the grandchildren spelled Lawrence a bit curiously, L-A-R-A-N-C-E, but you got to understand the Southern drawl. What non-Southerners pronounce as Lawrence, these people pronounced as Lawrence. So, if Willie really did tell Aunt Allie this, then why didn't she speak up back in 1965 when the memorial was being created? She didn't say a word back then, even though she was front and center in the middle of legally organizing the damn cemetery. So, if Willie really told his daughter Allie that way back when, then why didn't she speak up in 1965 when all children, including her, were saying Lawrence instead of Lunsford? And why would he tell everybody else his middle name was Lawrence and then go and tell her something different? I know Willie had his issues, but manipulation and deceit weren't any of them. It just doesn't make any sense. And you know, it's real easy to change history when everybody who can dispute it is already dead or has one foot in the grave. Remember, she told the story in 1980. I might have bought into Aunt Allie's story too if she had spoken up back in 1965 when the memorial was being created, but she didn't. And just for the record, I attribute the peculiar spelling of Lawrence to perhaps a bit of illiteracy going on with the person who placed the order. I mean no disrespect, but in my humble opinion, said person didn't know how to spell Lawrence, even though they probably thought they did. And so they ended up spelling it the way it was pronounced to them, Lawrence. That said, I personally believe my grandmother over her sister Allie. Not only was my grandmother one of the older children, she was number 6 out of 14, and to be fair, numbers 4 and 5 were twins, whereas Allie was number 11. 9 years separated them in age. Plus, I remember Aunt Allie, and unlike our half-cousin, I knew her very well throughout my childhood and teenage years. And I advise everybody to take anything that Aunt Allie said with a grain of salt. She was notorious for embellishing a story in her favor, and trust me, you're going to see plenty of examples throughout these videos supporting that claim too. See, what happened was, our half-cousin did a number of interviews with Aunt Allie back in 1980, where he confesses that he didn't really get to know her until then. So yeah, I think I know her true character a little better than him. But anyway, during the course of these interviews, I can tell you exactly what happened. Aunt Allie started to feel important, being interviewed and all. And when she ran out of real family tales to tell, she didn't want the interviews to end, so she started making shit up. I mean, it wasn't like everybody else was glued to her ear, had their ears glued to her mouth the way he did. But anyway, you know, it's 1980. Who's going to dispute her word? Everybody who would stand up to her was already dead, save Aunt Sally. But she was in Missouri with failing health, where she died in 1981. So anyway, I'm teaching my descendants that his name was William Lawrence Williams, and you don't have to agree with me on that either. No biggie. You can call him whatever the hell you want. But mostly, I just call him Willie. And sadly, Willie's life started out badly. He was just 12 years old when his father died in 1881. There was no welfare system in those days, so Willie, being the eldest, had to quit school and go to work to help support the family. He did this by cutting and splitting wood into 5 to 6 foot rails for fences. Willie earned 15 cents for a full day's labor. It's been said, even though Willie was never able to attend school for more than a few weeks after his father's death, that he demonstrated a natural ability for reading, writing, and arithmetic. And all I can say, y'all, is he must have traded in common sense for it, because honestly, my great-grandfather did a lot of questionable things during the course of his adulthood years. But let's back up a little. At the age of 17 or 18, Willie was involved in a cotton gin accident where the fingers of one of his hands got caught in the machine. So, Willie panics and tries to free his trapped fingers with the other hand. His efforts were ineffectual, though. He ended up damaging his fingers on both hands. Willie was seen by a doctor, and luckily none of his fingers were severed in the accident, but in the end he did suffer permanent damage to the ends of his fingers on both hands. That said, y'all, he was not maimed as some of our relatives would have you believe. He still had the use of his hands. It's just that the ends of his fingers were crooked as he was unable to straighten them, but he was not deformed. To hear some of our relatives tell it, Willie was this superhuman guy who had 0 vices. But that's an incorrect and unfair assessment of quite a colorful character. I don't know if Willie had any serious courtships prior to meeting my great-grandmother Lizzie Fuller in the mid to late 1880s. But one thing I do remember hearing my grandmother and her sisters discussing quite frequently was how much Willie and Lizzie were smitten with one another. And before we get into the next phase of Willie's life, married with children, I feel like this is a good place to pause Willie's life and tell you a little bit about Lizzie's family, the Fullers, before we dive into married life with Willie and Lizzie. So stay tuned. Up next is the Fullers, Archibald and Elizabeth, later Gators.